Edgar Cayce warned us Russia will save the world, but America must fall. First Prophecy 2025. Welcome to The Journey of Wisdom, a sanctuary for seekers of truth, where timeless teachings and prophetic insights guide us through the confusion of modern life. Here, we don't chase trends, we listen for echoes from the past that may hold the key to our future. And few voices echo louder than that of Edgar Cayce, the man known as the Sleeping Prophet. In his trances, he spoke of healing, of coming trials, and of a world in desperate need of spiritual awakening. But one message stands out like a bolt of lightning across history. Out of Russia comes the hope of the world. A strange hope, isn't it? In a time where war, division, and fear dominate global headlines, why would hope rise from the East, while the West, the very symbol of power and freedom, must first fall? Could it be that our understanding of strength is all wrong? That before renewal comes, a collapse must happen not just of nations, but of pride, greed, and spiritual forgetfulness? This isn't about global politics. It's about deeper truths, about prophecy, about karma, and about the soul of humanity. The real question is not who will dominate the future, but who will awaken in time to shape it. Let us begin. Number 1. Who was Edgar Cayce? Edgar Cayce, often known as the Sleeping Prophet, remains one of the most intriguing and enigmatic spiritual figures of the 20th century. Unlike scholars, clergy, or political leaders, Cayce was not a man of titles or institutions. He was a modest Christian from Kentucky, deeply rooted in his faith and simple lifestyle. What made him extraordinary was not his personal ambition, but a unique ability to enter deep, trance-like states where he appeared to access vast realms of knowledge beyond anything he had studied or read. In these states, he offered thousands of readings spoken while asleep that touched on subjects ranging from physical healing and spiritual growth to prophecies of world events and the deeper mysteries of human existence. His followers weren't drawn by theatrics or sensationalism, but by the clarity, compassion, and accuracy of the insights he shared. While Cayce himself denied possessing any special powers, insisting the source of this wisdom came from a higher universal consciousness aligned with divine will, the legacy he left behind continues to provoke wonder and serious study. One of the most powerful and controversial messages Cayce delivered concerned the role of Russia in the spiritual future of humanity. In one of his most quoted and debated prophecies, he stated, "Out of Russia comes the hope of the world, not in terms of communism, but of spiritual freedom." This was not a political endorsement, nor was it a prediction about global power structures in the conventional sense. Rather, Cayce pointed to a spiritual awakening that he believed would emerge from Russia, a country that had long been associated with turmoil, suffering, and ideological struggle. His words challenged prevailing views, especially during the Cold War era, when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in deep mistrust. Coming from an American deeply devoted to his faith, this prophecy was as surprising as it was profound. Cayce was not interested in national pride or domination. He was pointing to the mysterious ways that spiritual light might rise from the very places most scorched by darkness. To understand the depth of this prophecy, we need to look at the symbolic patterns within Cayce's work. Over and over, he emphasized that growth, whether for individuals or nations, often comes through hardship. Russia, in his view, had endured incredible suffering, but this suffering could become fertile ground for a collective spiritual transformation. He foresaw that the true hope of the world would not come from political powerhouses, economic giants, or technological leaders, but from a nation that had been brought low, humbled, and purified by pain. This was not about communism, capitalism, or any man-made system. Cayce's vision was about the soul of a people learning something essential, something the world would one day need to survive its own arrogance and spiritual disconnection. The concept of spiritual freedom he spoke of had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with a deeper connection to truth, compassion, and universal values that transcend any border. What makes Cayce's statement so enduring is its spiritual logic. He often said that individuals, and by extension, nations must go through a kind of inner death before they can be reborn into higher consciousness. America, as he implied in other readings, might face a fall not as punishment, but as a necessary step toward humility and spiritual re-evaluation. This wasn't a message of doom, but of deep transformation. If America were to cling to materialism, domination, and self-righteousness, it would falter. But if it could learn, through its own trials, to remember its spiritual roots and act from compassion rather than fear or pride, it could also find renewal. In this context, Russia's hope wasn't about it rising above the world, but becoming a symbol of what happens when a people remember their soul after losing everything else. Cayce's message was always layered. One must read between the lines, not with fear or nationalism, but with spiritual discernment. Cayce's prophecy resonates even more today as we face increasing global instability, confusion about moral leadership, and deepening divisions across societies. His words seem to call us beyond the headlines and surface-level conflicts, urging us to reflect on what truly defines the hope of the world. It is not military power, economic dominance, or even political unity. It is the emergence of a spirit that honors truth, humility, service, and the interconnectedness of all life. In his own quiet way, Cayce warned that nations rise and fall not by their armies or their wealth, but by the strength of their collective soul. And in that light, his vision of Russia becoming a beacon of spiritual renewal is less about the country itself and more about what can emerge when a people are forged through suffering and awakened to something deeper. It is a reminder to all of us that the next turning point in human history might not come from where we expect, but from where the heart has been broken open enough to let the light in. Number 2. Russia, a symbol of sacred hope. Russia was not chosen in Edgar Cayce's vision because of its might or military dominance. It was chosen because of its deep wounds, because of the way it has endured and survived immense suffering. What happens to a nation when it is brought to its knees? When the people have tasted the bitter depths of war, famine, censorship, and spiritual emptiness. Cayce's insight challenges us to look beyond appearances and ask, what kind of transformation is possible after a long, dark night of the soul? While other nations advanced in power, wealth, or global status, Russia was marked by silence and suppression, by loss and resilience. But it is precisely in that silence, when there was nothing left to rely on, when voices were stifled and hope seemed extinguished, that something sacred began to stir from within. In a land where chapels were once destroyed and sacred images hidden in fear, small acts of faith continued, often in secret, but always alive. Prayers were whispered behind closed doors, candles lit in the dark, icons kissed not for show but from the depths of the heart. Have you ever thought about what it means for a people to keep faith alive when it's not safe, not easy, and not encouraged? What Cayce saw wasn't about politics, it was about soul. Russia became a vessel of sacred hope, not because it conquered anything, but because its people, shaped by hardship, remembered what it means to be humble. That kind of humility, the kind born from brokenness, not from success, is what Cayce believed the world would need to see and learn from. And this brings us back to something deeply human. Haven't we all had moments when we lost everything we thought mattered, only to discover a deeper part of ourselves still standing? Russia, in this prophecy, reflects that same inner journey, but on a collective, national scale. From the ashes of its past, it did not rise with loud declarations, but with quiet reverence. Churches that had been abandoned were rebuilt not just with bricks, but with tears and memory. In forests, basements, and ruined spaces, worship continued not as performance, but as deep yearning for truth, for connection, for something eternal. That yearning, Cayce suggested, is where true spiritual strength is born. So what does this mean for the rest of us, those watching from the outside, perhaps with skepticism or confusion? It means we are being invited to look at suffering differently. Could it be that the places we dismiss, the people or nations we pity, may actually be holding something we desperately need to learn? Russia's story, as Cayce saw it, wasn't about returning to power, but returning to the soul. And in a world increasingly driven by ego, division, and distraction, a message like this carries more weight than ever. If we allow ourselves to listen not just with our minds, but with our hearts, we may begin to see that the greatest hope often rises quietly, through pain, through humility, and through a rediscovery of what truly matters. So, the lesson here is not about predicting which country will dominate the future. It's about understanding the spiritual qualities the world needs in order to heal. Edgar Cayce pointed to Russia not as a savior, but as a symbol, a reminder that after great loss, there can be great awakening. It challenges each of us to ask, what have we done with our own suffering? Have we become bitter, or have we allowed it to humble us, shape us, and open our hearts to deeper truths? And as we consider the future not just for nations but for humanity itself, perhaps the real prophecy is that only through humility, compassion, and spiritual awakening can any of us move forward into something better. That is the hope Cayce spoke of, and it begins not with power, but with the courage to be transformed. If you've watched up to this point, you're already seeking truth beyond the headlines, just like Edgar Cayce did. Comment below with "Awakened Path" to show you're ready to explore the deeper forces shaping our world. Don't miss what's coming next. There's still powerful insight ahead that could shift how you see the future of America, Russia, and the world. Stay until the end to unlock the full message behind this prophecy. If there is a message here, it's not one of fear, it's one of opportunity. The fall that Cayce spoke of isn't final unless we refuse to wake up. And waking up means turning away from the noise and returning to stillness. It means looking inward, asking hard questions, and choosing truth over trend. It means living not for ego or applause, but for something higher. This is how nations heal. This is how people rise, not by holding on to illusions, but by remembering the sacred purpose we were meant to live. Number 3. America, an empire in spiritual decline. America has long been admired as a land of freedom, creativity, and seemingly endless opportunity. A nation built on bold ideals, daring visions, and the belief that anything is possible for those who strive. For generations, it has stood as a beacon to the world, representing not only material success, but also the promise of personal liberty and moral leadership. But if you take a closer look today, beyond the high-rises, the digital marvels, and the constant buzz of progress, you might begin to feel something unsettling beneath the surface. There is a spiritual hunger that no amount of wealth, entertainment, or political power can satisfy. Edgar Cayce, in his quiet yet powerful warnings, saw this coming not as a sudden crash, but as a slow and dangerous drift away from purpose. A loss of spiritual direction that can erode even the strongest foundations. So, ask yourself, what happens when a nation no longer remembers why it was blessed in the first place? What happens when success becomes so loud that the voice of the soul can no longer be heard? This isn't a fall marked by bombs or invasions. It's far more subtle and, perhaps, more dangerous. It's the kind of decline that creeps in quietly when comfort becomes our God and convenience becomes our compass. We have filled our lives with constant stimulation, scrolling through devices, chasing trends, and building identities around image rather than integrity. Yet many of us feel more disconnected and anxious than ever before. Cayce pointed to this inner collapse, this erosion of spirit, as the true warning for America. It's not about losing global dominance or falling behind in innovation. It's about losing our connection to what truly matters. We've traded sacred silence for endless noise. We no longer pause to reflect, we reach for distraction. And as we consume more and more, we understand less and less about who we are, why we're here, and what our place is in the greater story of life. Even our spiritual spaces, places once rooted in awe and reverence, are not immune. Many churches today are full in numbers, but empty in depth. Worship can sometimes feel like a show, more focused on performance than transformation. Messages that once called people to higher truths now often echo like motivational speeches, comfortable but lacking the fire that awakens the soul. We may still use the language of faith, but have we lost the heartbeat of it? Do we raise our hands in worship but refuse to lower our pride in daily life? This is the kind of spiritual amnesia Cayce warned us about, a condition where we still wear the garments of a spiritual nation, but our hearts have wandered far from the source. And when a society forgets its soul, no amount of policy, progress, or patriotism can fill the void that remains. It's important to remember that Cayce didn't speak with judgment. His warnings were not about shaming America, but about awakening it. He believed that the real danger wasn't in external threats, but in the internal decision to replace the eternal with the artificial. We are not starving for food or shelter, we are starving for meaning. Surrounded by comforts, we have grown spiritually apathetic. We know how to build, how to market, how to entertain, but have we forgotten how to be still, how to listen, how to humble ourselves before something greater? America, in Cayce's vision, was not doomed by others, but by its own slow choice to crown the self in place of the sacred. When the self becomes the center of everything, when personal gain overshadows collective good, when image is more important than truth, then the fall is already underway, even if the structures still stand tall. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with a question only we can answer. Are we willing to return to what is real? Can we pause long enough to ask what our purpose truly is, not as consumers or voters or content creators, but as spiritual beings living through a pivotal moment in history? Cayce's warning invites us to look honestly at where we've placed our trust, our attention, and our devotion. He reminds us that no nation, no matter how wealthy or strong, can survive if it forgets its soul. And perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. Decline doesn't always look like destruction. It can look like distraction. It can look like busyness without meaning, progress without purpose, and lives that are full but not fulfilled. Number 4. The core message. America must fall to be restored. The message Edgar Cayce left us about America's future is not one of doom, but of deep spiritual transformation, and at the heart of it lies a truth that is difficult yet necessary to face. Before true renewal can happen, a kind of fall must occur. But let's be clear, the fall Cayce spoke of was never about destruction through war or collapse through violence. It wasn't about fire raining from the skies or enemies invading our shores. It was about the soul of a nation losing its way and being lovingly, if painfully, called back to its center. Cayce's vision points to a reckoning that is spiritual in nature, not political. It's not punishment, it's a wake-up call. It's the moment where everything we thought we could depend on, our wealth, our status, our distractions, our sense of control, begins to slip through our fingers, not to break us, but to bring us home to something greater. And isn't that what often happens in our personal lives as well? Sometimes we have to lose what we were clinging to before we can reach for what we truly need. America, in this prophecy, is no different. We have built so much, achieved so much, but in the process, we've also wandered far from the spiritual foundations that once gave this country its soul. When Cayce spoke of America needing to fall, he was speaking about a sacred kind of unraveling the shedding of false gods and false securities. We've grown accustomed to worshipping things that cannot love us back: fame, technology, wealth, entertainment, the illusion of self-sufficiency. These things are not evil in themselves, but they become dangerous when we elevate them above all else, when they take the place of reverence, humility, and connection to the divine. So this fall isn't about punishment, it's about mercy. It's a stripping away of the illusions we've mistaken for truth, a painful but redemptive process of remembering who we are beyond what we own or achieve. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because history is full of nations that stood tall in pride, only to collapse inward when they forgot their spiritual center. Egypt once stood as the most advanced empire of its time. Babylon was unmatched in its splendor, and Rome reigned in strength and ambition, yet each of them fell, not because they lacked military power or brilliant minds, but because they let pride replace reverence, and forgot that even the mightiest civilization cannot survive when it turns its back on the eternal. And now, we must ask ourselves honestly, has America come to that same crossroads? Are we being given a chance not to be destroyed, but to be awakened? Cayce's warning was not a prediction carved in stone, it was a compassionate invitation to change. He saw that if we continued down the path of spiritual apathy, the fall would be necessary, not to harm us, but to humble us. And within that humility lies our greatest chance for healing, because it's often in the silence that follows collapse, not in the roar of our accomplishments, that we finally hear what truly matters. It is in the stillness, when our idols have failed us, and our pride has been surrendered, that God speaks again, not in thunder or spectacle, but in the quiet places of the heart. So the fall, then, is not the end of America. It is the beginning of something far more enduring. It is the space where truth can rise again, not as something broadcast to the world, but as something felt deeply within. Before revival can come, Cayce reminds us, something false must first be torn down. And maybe, just maybe, it is only through the humbling that we will remember how to kneel. Only through the loss of what is shallow can we recover what is sacred, and only through the fall can we find our way once more to grace. If you're still watching, it means you're open to truths that many ignore. Type "Truth Seeker" in the comments to declare your readiness for a higher understanding. The final part of this video holds revelations that may challenge and awaken you. Don't miss what's next. Number 5. Russia's role in the new era. In Edgar Cayce's prophetic vision, Russia does not rise as a global conqueror or a dominating force. It rises as something far more profound, a witness to the power of spiritual endurance. When Cayce said, "Out of Russia comes the hope of the world," he wasn't talking about politics or ideologies. He was pointing to a people who, after walking through the fires of suffering, held on to something the modern world has nearly forgotten: faith born out of humility. You see, Russia's strength isn't in its weapons or influence, it's in its scars. It is a nation that has endured oppression, famine, and decades of censorship, where simply speaking the truth could cost you your freedom. But in the silence forced upon them, something sacred survived. While churches were torn down and truth was driven underground, people still found a way to pray. They prayed in whispers, behind closed doors, in forests and in basements. They passed down icons and scriptures like treasure, not because they were valuable in the world's eyes, but because they held the key to something eternal. Have you ever considered how strong faith must be when it's kept alive without approval, without comfort, and without freedom? That's what Cayce saw when he spoke of Russia's role not in leading the world with dominance, but in reminding the world of what it has forgotten. Russia, through its pain, developed a different kind of power, the power to wait in the dark, to listen in silence, and to hope without any visible reason. That kind of spiritual resilience isn't learned in times of prosperity, it's shaped in seasons of loss. When the shelves were empty and the truth was dangerous, the soul of a people was being quietly refined, much like gold in fire. And from that fire, a deeper strength emerged, not the kind that boasts, but the kind that bows. It's a strength rooted in repentance, in humility, and in the desperate, yet faithful, hunger for God. In a world so focused on what's fast, flashy, and profitable, Russia offers a counterpoint, a quiet voice saying, "There is something more." So, what does this mean for us today? It means we need to rethink what true leadership looks like in the spiritual sense. Could it be that the real guiding light won't come from those who shout the loudest, but from those who suffered in silence and still chose to believe? Russia's role, according to Cayce, is not to dominate, but to remind. Not to rise by force, but to stand as a living example of what revival truly looks like, not born in palaces or boardrooms, but in prisons, in hunger, and in prayer. In this moment, when so many are chasing new ideas, instant gratification, and surface-level peace, Cayce's vision invites us to look deeper. Perhaps the world doesn't need another powerful nation, but a faithful one. Perhaps the voice we should listen to is not the loudest, but the one that has known true brokenness and chose faith over bitterness. And here is the lesson. True spiritual power is not about strength, but about surrender. Revival does not come from those who have never fallen. It comes from those who fell and chose to rise with grace. In this prophecy, Russia becomes a symbol not of conquest, but of quiet redemption. It teaches us that spiritual leadership doesn't begin with pride, it begins with repentance. And if we're willing to listen, not just with our ears but with our hearts, we might just find that the path forward isn't to be found in chasing greatness, but in remembering what it means to walk humbly with God. Number 6. Final message and call to action. This final message from Edgar Cayce is not about nations battling for dominance, nor is it about taking sides between East and West. Rather, it's about shifting our perspective from the surface of worldly affairs to the deep roots of spiritual truth. Cayce wasn't calling us to choose a flag, he was calling us to choose a way of being, a return to the soul. The crisis we face today, as individuals and as a global society, is not political at its core, it is spiritual. What we see in the headlines, the conflicts, the chaos, the division, is only the reflection of a deeper disconnect happening inside the human heart. And so, this prophecy offers not fear, but direction. It asks us to pause long enough to examine our own inner condition, and from that place of honesty, we're invited into 3 sacred actions, simple yet life-changing. The first is this: humble yourself. It's not about blaming or defending a country, but about letting go of national pride, cultural superiority, and the illusions that power and wealth make a people spiritually secure. Just like the Buddha once said, "A fool who knows he is a fool is for that very reason a wise man. The fool who thinks he is wise is called a fool indeed." Humility isn't weakness, it's the beginning of wisdom. When we acknowledge how far we've drifted from compassion, truth, and spiritual clarity, we open the door to healing not just for ourselves, but for the world. The second call is just as crucial: seek divine truth. In today's world, where we are bombarded by opinions, algorithms, news, and noise every waking moment, truth can feel like a moving target. We are constantly distracted, endlessly connected, yet deeply spiritually disconnected. Cayce's warning is timely: step away from the storm of voices and return to the still small voice that has always been there. Whether through sacred texts, quiet reflection, prayer, or meditation. Now is the time to seek what is timeless, not trending. As the Dhammapada teaches, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. We must choose to listen, not with our ears only, but with our hearts. Let our values be guided not by political tribes, fear-based media, or cultural noise, but by the eternal truths that unify us all. In the Christian tradition, this may mean turning back to the Word of God. In the Buddhist tradition, it may mean cultivating mindfulness and compassion as a daily practice. Whatever your path, the goal is the same: to return to the source, the place within that is beyond ego, beyond division, and rooted in love. And the third invitation is perhaps the most powerful and yet the most overlooked. Pray for revival. Not just for the land you live in, but for the hearts of people everywhere. Pray for the broken places in the world, not with anger, but with compassion. Pray for the streets of your own city, for the suffering of strangers, for the lonely elder in a Russian village, for the frightened child in an American suburb, for leaders to be awakened not to more control, but to deeper care. True revival begins when hearts soften, when tears fall not out of despair, but from yearning for what is good and true. Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, the Buddha said, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. That is the power of sincere prayer. It multiplies light, even in darkness. It's not about religion, it's about awakening. It's about remembering that every soul on this earth, regardless of where they are born or what language they speak, shares the same deep longing for peace, purpose, and belonging. Cayce's message, when fully heard, brings us back to what matters most. The world will not be saved by the next election, the next invention, or the next trend. It will be saved by people like you, ordinary people, who choose to go inward instead of outward, who choose prayer instead of panic, humility instead of pride, stillness instead of endless striving. And maybe that's what this moment in history is truly asking of us. Can we surrender our grip on control, on being right, on being powerful, and simply fall to our knees, not in defeat, but in return? Can we begin to light candles in the ashes rather than reaching for weapons in fear? True hope, as Cayce reminded us, isn't loud. It's not something that storms into the world. It grows slowly, like a seed. It sings softly in the prisons of life. It burns quietly in hearts that choose forgiveness, and it lives wherever someone dares to believe in a better world, not through force, but through faith. So, as we close this message, ask yourself this: what part of my own life needs to fall so that something higher can rise? What have I built on pride or fear, and what would it look like to build instead on truth and love? The lesson is clear. Revival doesn't come from the top down. It begins within, and it begins with you. As we reflect on Edgar Cayce's powerful prophecy, we are reminded that the future of humanity doesn't rest in political power or national pride, but in the quiet, often painful journey back to spiritual truth. Whether it's Russia rising through humility or America awakening through its fall, the message is not about division, but transformation. In the end, Cayce's vision calls each of us not to fear, but to return. Return to the soul, return to compassion, return to what is sacred and lasting. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to The Journey of Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming explorations into prophecy, spirituality, and timeless truths. Together, may we continue to seek not just answers, but awakening.